Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this month's CoLab talk. We're right at 1 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. And the CoLab talk is new this year, our monthly discussion series here, produced and sponsored here in the CoLab, looking at what is exciting, complicated, and new in our high-tech world. This semester, we've presented this the first Thursday of every month. Fall, we're getting ready to announce our fall schedule for next semester, so keep an eye out for that. Again, I'm Benjamin. I'm one of your support specialists here in the CoLab. There's a team of 7 of us here in the CoLab with really diverse skills and abilities. We're excited to be the college's high-tech collaboration and event space. So if there's a project we can help you with, please reach out to us. Today, we're looking at social media, and specifically how to be a savvy social media user and consumer. Our influencer that we're going to start with today is Alexis Ohanian. Anybody familiar with this person already, that name? So I'm seeing some back, okay. Professional awareness back here, yeah. Alexis is best known as the co-founder and former chairperson of Reddit, the so-called front page of the internet, right? He's also well known among the tabloid set as the spouse of tennis star Serena Williams. He's been heavily involved in open internet and net neutrality efforts, both here in the United States and abroad. He's also helped co-found several other organizations besides Reddit. His other online projects include Breadpig, which is a geek culture charity. They make t-shirts and kind of geek apparel and that kind of stuff. Proceeds are all donated to charity. HipMonk.com, which is a company that competes in discount travel against like Hotwire and Priceline, and then as well as 2 investment capital firms, Das Kapital and Initialized Capital, both of which are early stage venture capital firms focused on the technology sector. What we're going to look at, in terms of education and formal training, Ohanian was educated at the University of Virginia with degrees in commerce and history. So as someone with a bachelor's in history myself, proof that yes, you can do something with a degree in history. Okay, so what we're going to look at now is we're going to watch a 2009 TED Talk, so a little bit back, but still I think relevant for us, where Ohanian delivered a talk about a whale named Mr. Splashy Pants. And after we watch the TED Talk, we'll invite up our expert panel for discussion. Okay. So while everybody thinks of a reaction to that, I'll invite up our expert panel here to join us. So, also makes me think of if anybody remembers the Bodie McBoatface thing that went a few years ago, where they were looking to name a Arctic explorer. They did a similar online vote, and the winning vote was Bodie McBoatface. So they didn't actually end up naming the ship that. Okay, so for our expert panel, I'd like to thank them for joining us today. We can't do these events without our expert panel, and they're all here donating their time. So thank you again to everybody for being here today. Going alphabetically here, our first member of the panel is Paige Kaufman Fellows, JCCC Social Media and Content Coordinator. Paige serves here as social media and content coordinator for JCCC. In addition to leading social strategy for the organization, she creates content for the JCCC website, advertising initiatives, and more. She also assists with media relations and content planning. Prior to working at the college, Paige served as an account executive at Morningstar Communications, a local strategic communications firm. In that role, she oversaw daily client activities for multiple accounts while creating social media plans, compelling media outreach programs, and content for a variety of channels. Paige is involved in Underground Social, a young professional group working to develop the next generation of female leaders in Kansas City, and frequently participates in volunteer initiatives. In her spare time, Paige likes to read, travel, and play kickball in a local league. Paige earned her Bachelor of Science in Journalism with an emphasis in strategic communication from University of Kansas. All right, next on our panel, we have Professor Aaron Hollister, Assistant Professor of Marketing Management here, with more than a decade in marketing and sales experience in both the public and private sectors. Professor Hollister has been teaching marketing at the college level since 2013. Prior to joining JCCC's faculty full-time this semester, Aaron served as an instructor at Dona Ana Community College in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and as adjunct faculty here at JCCC and at Kansas City, Kansas Community College. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Marketing from Kansas State University and a Master of Business Administration from the University of Kansas School of Business. And finally, Professor Jim Hopper, Professor and Chair of Web Development and Digital Media. James Hopper is professor and chair of the program here at Johnson County Community College and has over 20 years experience teaching web design and development and digital media, including storytelling here at Johnson County Community College, and over 30 years experience creating media-rich interactive websites and digital media stories. He has spoken at national conferences such as the National Association of Government Web Professionals on Storytelling and Web Design. He graduated from Kansas Universities with bachelor and master's degrees in journalism and is currently working on a second master's in graphic information technology from Arizona State University. Please welcome our expert panel. Okay, so first things first, I want to ask both our audience and our expert panel here. And panel, if you could, when you respond, go ahead and grab that microphone between Aaron and Paige and pass that between you for our videography folks, if you would. Initial thoughts or impressions after watching our TED Talk here? Thank you, Aaron. Be sure to hit the on switch there at the front. Good. Okay, good. Thank you.
I guess I'll start.
You're on the spot now.
Yeah, I shouldn't have grabbed the microphone, right? No, I think Alex makes a lot of good points, and oftentimes we think that we can direct a message, but generally when it's on social media, we lose a lot of control of that message. And so what social media allows us to do is listen to the messages that are being sent out from our users specifically, and be able to respond accordingly. Sometimes there may be issues or great things going on, and being able to listen to that allows us to respond in a way that makes sense in real time. We can do it really quickly. A problem that exists for 30 days is a much bigger problem than one that exists for 10 minutes. And if we can respond to those quickly, then we can maybe save ourselves some time, money, and a lot of headache. So that's one of the main takeaways that I get.
Thank you. Paige or Jim, any?
Okay. Hello. So first, don't you guys think Alex looks like Ted Mosby from How I Met Your Mother? Okay, because that's just first impression there. But two, I mean, I would definitely agree with everything just said, but one point is going viral is actually very difficult. I mean, it does not happen very often, but when it does, you're going to definitely want to make sure you are monitoring the message, because you truly do lose control. And it does depend on your audience. Like in this case, clearly the people wanted Mr. Whaley Whale.
Mr. Splashy Pants. Yeah.
Whaley Whale. Mr. Splashy Pants, that was definitely, in with their audience and what they could do. But if it's something, and that's a positive thing, and it brought about positive change. But if it's something negative, you really have to be on the ball and work twice as hard to try and have any slight bit of control of the message. And if that's responding to people, putting out a statement about it, there's just different ways to look at that.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to take a slightly different point of view. From a storytelling point of view, what they did was what I would call transmedia storytelling. They invited the audience to tell part of that story. They brought them in, so it wasn't really losing control. It was letting the story out and having the audience fill it fuller, make it a more complete story. So that's the point of view that I took it from.
And I think that's an interesting point, because I think we could see in this discussion that there was a turning point in how they were choosing to handle that, whether it was trying to control or trying to engage in storytelling. And that initial response was, okay, how do we try to control this? How do we handle this? And before they got comfortable with the idea of, okay, we can embrace the fact that this is a little chaotic and still maybe meet our objectives. Sounds like that there was a transition they had to go through as an organization.
I thought they did. They made a big move away from, this is my story, therefore I'm going to push it at you, versus let's make it our story and let's all take part in it and have it grow that way.
That's actually, I think, a great segue into our first kind of formal discussion question, unless any of the audience would like to provide feedback before we jump into that. Yep. Professor?
Interesting. And I'd love to hear what you guys think. I thought it was interesting that for a very serious client like Greenpeace, of course, they think in their head that they want a very serious presence or representation out there. However, by having Mr. Splashy Pants, it seemed to make it so much more accessible, and perhaps their message more accessible. And in the past, when I've had clients, that's a hard thing to sell. What do you guys think about the goofy meme and the very serious client message?
Well, I guess since I've got the mic and I like to talk, I'll start.
I do too, Jim. Hello.
Hello. You guys are in serious trouble now. Oh, you gave it up. I'm not going to give it. This becomes a two-way conversation, Gretchen and myself. You guys okay with it? I think you're right. They took what was a very serious story and it maintained a very serious point of view, but they made it to a point where someone actually cared about it. They emotionally tied into it. Rather than give facts and figures, today, 14,652 and a half whales were killed, became Save Mr. Splashy Pants. And it became something that people could grasp and engage. And that's where that storytelling aspect comes in. And that's the point of view that I'll take from there and pass it on down the road.
Yeah, and I think that they also listened to the cues, right? The cues were, hey, people really like something funny about this, so let's be funny with it. Now, and they did that in a way that made a lot of sense because that's what the audience wanted, and so they embraced it rather than fighting up that uphill battle that they were never going to win. So roll with the punches and embrace it. I think that was really smart of them. So they didn't look staunchy. They looked like they were open and cool, right? Yeah, it did, right? Absolutely.
Yeah, same. And it's all about listening. So just make sure you're monitoring and seeing what people are saying out there, because if you turn a blind eye and those serious people didn't see what the community was saying and you would lose that message and that opportunity to tell your story in that way. And you can tell they did try to, by opening the voting for another week, they tried to push back on that, but it was so clear that I think they made the right choice. So.
But then they jumped in and sold T-shirts.
Yeah.
So they really grasped it and said, "Oh, they took advantage of what was really going on." Yes.
I think I want to piggyback off of Paige's point, though, that importance of, and also what Aaron mentioned too, that importance of listening and making sure you're responding in a timely fashion. Though it sounds like that's a key difference between like maybe losing control of a message versus trying to engage with the storytelling. Is that if you're not doing that active listening and engagement piece, is where it sounds like you have the potential to become disengaged from your content at that point. Is that fair? Okay. Well, speaking of maybe disengaging or whether control is possible or even desirable. So, how important is control of the message once we put it out into a social? Is it possible? We've kind of discussed about it. In a lot of ways, it kind of isn't. In one of my previous roles professionally, I did social media marketing outreach for KU's financial aid and scholarships department. And I remember one of the biggest fears of our dean at the time was that they had no social media presence, and it was concerned about how do we listen effectively, and if we lose control of the message, what does that mean? Because they were looking at it primarily as a platform for pushing out information, not necessarily as a platform for engagement. And so I'm curious for our panel and for the audience as well, if you found that if part of how getting folks to engage with this idea of control or controlling to the extent that you can shifts about how they think about the platforms. If it's thinking about it traditional kind of marketing, advertising, outward, or if part of it's thinking about it more as a conversation as part of how you engage with this. So thoughts from our panel?
I've got the mic. I think, the English, please. There's a small movie that you may have never heard of, came out about 1977. It was called Star Wars. I don't know if you guys have ever been engaged in that. Star Wars spawned what was called the 501st Legion. The 501st Legion are storytellers, are people who dress in costume, they dress as stormtroopers, they dress as Darth Vader. They are continuing to tell the Star Wars stories. George Lucas, who is notorious for control, has taken this, grasped it and said, all right, let me send that out into the world, started out that way. And these people take the story very seriously, they love it, they live it, they do very good things in their Star Wars guise. So that's part of that transmedia, that storytelling, is he's paying close attention, well now Disney is, but they're letting the audience, they're letting the people who love the story help tell it, and that keeps it moving, and consequently, you've had 3 horrible prequels and about to have a 3rd sequel, so it's caused some amazing things to happen, and Star Wars is just one example. It goes even further and deeper because of our new technologies and the way that we can communicate with each other, and I'll pass it down the road.
Yeah, when users have the ability to post and create content as they do, you do lose some of that control. But I think if we start with appropriate goals, right, understanding what our goal is with a message, we can hopefully direct the conversation. But I don't think we can ever really control it 100%. But we can set goals to direct the conversation, and hopefully it goes in the direction we want it to. Sometimes things go a different direction entirely, and so being able to plan ahead and understand that what do you do if your message changes, I think is important. But control, is how much control do we have over a lot of things, right? And so.
I definitely agree. It should all be, the goal is that it's about engagement, I would say, for social media. You're putting messages out there, but the point is you want people to interact with you and for it to be meaningful to them. So definitely when you're posting or doing something like that, you're going to want to make sure your messages align with your brand standards and that type of thing. But once it's out there, it truly is out there. And it is just about realizing that you're going to have some flexibility. And if it does take on a role that you don't necessarily want, having a plan in place, because the worst thing you can do in that situation is not be prepared with any kind of basic messaging that you can update. So that's just kind of the goal, and just do what you can.
Thank you, everybody. Any thoughts from our attendees today? Yeah.
So I'm just thinking that in this age, when we have so much of information being bombarded to us, and truly, do we have net neutrality? How do you, and most of my students, at least that I see, are getting the 30-second media bites, and they are facing a whole life's philosophy, global view based on those images. To me, it's scary. I think, Paige, you sort of referred to that it could be a negative image. I mean, look at right now where we are in terms of all this investigation, Russian influence, and what have you. So to me, getting a catchy phrase or something, that's kind of cute. But as a global citizen, what I see, the effect of social media is downright scary, because I don't think we are really teaching, or we are really thinking through of how much influence we are putting out there with just simple images, whether it is Snapchat, and what have you. So I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
I agree. It can be scary when you just think about the power of social media. We've all seen it, something that someone doesn't even intend for more than 5 of their friends to see gets screenshotted, gets sent out, goes viral, and it can really change your life for the better or worse. And so in regards to how how that can impact you from fake news and things like that, I challenge everyone in this room and beyond to be a really conscious user, and don't just read headlines. Be aware of those cues, check your sources. The most we can do is hope that what we're putting out there is real, and you need to make sure and do your homework and know that you're not spreading fake news or spreading lies. And so just being educated on both sides of the spectrum, I think, is important.
One of the fears that I have is confirmation bias, right? We only listen to the people that we agree with, right? And so we don't hear all sides of everything. And I think that specifically with social media, you follow people that you may agree with, and so you're not hearing all sides of every story. And I think that becomes a pretty big issue as well, listening to the story that you want to hear.
Well, I would love to say that echo chamber is a new feature. We've always had echo chambers. We've always gathered in groups and supported each other. Social media makes it easier to repeat that message, to hear it come back at ourselves. Excuse me, I get all choked up talking about that. The idea is learning how to reach out beyond what those channels that we talk about, because they're now available, engaging in those conversations rather than just having the message pushed. Growing up, we had 3 news channels. The messages were pushed to us. Today, my children have more news channels than I know what to do with, but teaching them that to go across, even listen to the sides you don't agree with, so that you can start to round out that picture rather than just say, yeah, I agree with this completely, therefore It's the only channel I'm going to listen to.
So it sounds like there's both risk and opportunity in this setting of there's certainly a tendency towards oversimplification, right? Particularly on some of these platforms. And I think of Twitter as kind of the classic one, since it was usually so limited. It's kind of, okay, we're going to get a really short soundbite. So thinking about, okay, what does that do about how we think about news and events and others when we're thinking in sound bites? But the platforms also offer a way to engage with major influencers and big companies and other people in a way that we haven't had before. So yeah, it's, there's opportunity and reason for concern, it sounds like, in this, just like a lot of the other technologies we develop.
I think the
Yep.
point being that, when you look at Middle East, for instance, the Arab Spring that happened through social media in Egypt, for instance, when the call goes out that let's all meet at the Tahrir Square and we're going to all make, what happened in Tunisia and so forth. So the power of exponentially making sure that the tide goes into a different way, that is so much stronger. And I agree, Jim, we've had echo chambers, but I think when you're talking about and litigating in this country, the fact that the entire election was influenced, that part, given what actually happened with 30 years of military rule and how Arab Spring took place in the Middle East, that part can be very powerful and can influence one way or the other. And I don't know if we are offering classes and courses to let people understand how a movement can, take over without really analyzing and thinking through all this. That is what I'm
Exactly. Right. It isn't there. Well, and that is an interesting point, Samira. And one of the things that, for instance, we do in journalism, and this, Jim, is we try to teach students media literacy, to be consumers, and I have an assignment where they actually have to look at a piece of news and then from different sources and how different that gets. But it is interesting because if you go back to the history of journalism, there's always been partisan journalism, back in colonial days, and it is still a problem. It's just, it's different. One thing that drives me crazy, though, is that people post stuff without checking anything. I'll get these emails from my friends that are educated people, and I'm thinking, do you not even look at Snopes? I mean, don't forward that to your whole address book until checking. But I agree. I think it's same old, just.
Yeah, well, we need to learn digital. I mean, not only do we need media literacy, but that digital literacy. When I look at that
Right,
picture,
right.
what's in the picture? What am I
Right.
actually looking at? And
Yeah.
And I know that through our courses, I know the marketing people, I know the web. I'm absolutely sure the journalism teaches that kind of stuff. Are we teaching it well enough? Are students understanding? Are we still teenagers
Well,
in this age of digital
The-
media?
and
we're
the
trying to
way
grow.
that digital can be manipulated too, and even like there's a National Geographic cover that was about, you mentioned Egypt, this popped into my head, and the photographer wanted to show all the pyramids. You can't fit it into the cover, and so they squished them together. That was inaccurate. It doesn't really matter. Kinda. Yeah, it isn't a real representation of the world, and that's just a tiny microcosm of one little thing. But more important things are manipulated. Hello, Jim.
So that's a great example of actually, so we have this technology where it becomes easier to do that kind of manipulation, right? And then to share that manipulation out quickly without context. That actually, this conversation, I think, leads in nicely to our next discussion question, so I want to go ahead and jump to it. When we're talking about digital literacy, when we're talking about where does content come from and how much does that matter, are we paying attention? There's a meme that I have to admit I absolutely love, maybe other folks know it, referring to someone or something as that person is an absolute unit. I think that for some reason I like that meme. It's been funny to me. We use it in our house a lot. So the looks I'm getting, other folks are like, what the heck are you talking about? Apparently I live in a different part of the internet. That's okay though. So for this point though, for this meme, you can see though that other agencies and stuff started picking up on it. For example, this post here is from the Museum of English Rural Life. which I didn't know there was such a museum, but they posted using this absolute unit meme referencing to a picture of a sheep they have in their collection. I'm not sure that the Museum of English Rural Life has ever had 100,000 likes on something before. But so they grabbed that meme that was popular and applied it and were able to drive interest in their content. Does it matter, though, that that meme originally came from making fun of the way somebody looks? That it was originally posted, and of course I'm forgetting my notes to draw a blank on this gentleman's name right now, but he's a well-established London hotelier who was involved with the royal wedding a few years ago. So that's where this picture came from and the meme that developed from it. Now everyone looks huge next to Her Majesty Elizabeth II. She's a petite person. But does it matter that the museum decided to jump on that bandwagon and use that meme when it could arguably be, it's like, wow, that started out as fat shaming. It was making fun of somebody. Is it okay then? But it went viral. So it's a valuable, there's currency with that, right? So I'm curious with our panel and also with our guests of, okay, so once stuff goes viral, does the source matter? And is that maybe part of our conversation about digital literacy?
I'll take it. I think it should, and there's probably degrees, right? A joke that is maybe just the smallest bit insensitive is different from something that is horribly insensitive, right? And so I think that there's degrees, shades of gray too. And so this kind of goes back to knowing your company culture or your goals and saying, you know, how far do I want to go? And without a plan, it's difficult to know what you're allowed to do or what you're okay with doing, I guess is. And so that might come back to your mission and values, right? And so I think it does depend. And so it depends is kind of the answer that I would go with.
Thank you.
I would just say whether or not you decide to go with whatever it is, just make sure you know the original context and source of it. Just because the worst thing that could happen is if you don't know that is a fat shaming meme and it comes back to bite you, and then you have zero legs to stand on. So just doing your background research, and you know, if you don't know something, I don't know if you guys saw that article yesterday about the professor at some school who has a spreadsheet of all the Gen Z slang terms. It's pretty funny. You should look it up. But I mean, just having that education, if you don't know what a certain thing means, don't just post it because everyone else is. You need to know the context.
And I think that goes to maybe the point, or makes me think of what we were discussing earlier about it's so easy so often for folks to then amplify messages and share them without first figuring out, okay, where did this come from? Because of our short, you know, I think almost like our media drives a short attention span in some way, right? If it encourages that we're going to respond in the minute, we're going to be engaged in the moment, and sometimes that doesn't include thinking actively about, okay, where did this come from? Yeah.
And I think that it also goes back to listening too. So if you do end up making a mistake and listening and then responding appropriately.
Thank you. Isaiah?
When it comes to listening and something goes viral, it's sending a bad message for your company, and you kind of develop this bad brand image after that. The company then has to go through rewriting their story or rewriting their brand, and I guess it depends on the action that they take. Is that kind of what you're?
Sure. Make sure a viral story has gone bad about the company, and now the company has to respond. How they respond, how they accept responsibility or push responsibility off, has a lot to how that brand is repaired or not repaired. And you see that all the time where it's not our fault, it was their fault. And that company doesn't usually make it much past that. It's writing that story, accepting, saying, all right, yeah, we screwed up, here's how we're going to try to fix it.
Yeah, I think that goes to transparency, right? And you lose credibility when you're not transparent, and so trying to maintain that credibility.
Maintain that credibility and respond quickly, because if they don't hear from you for a long period of time, it just makes things worse. It makes the news cycle last longer.
Okay. So I feel like we've done a nice job of being able to kind of segue into our next questions here today. So our last one here. Anybody familiar with this meme? Does anybody recognize that? Pepe the Frog? Okay. So we've talked a lot about in context of organizations and companies and that kind of thing. I would like to maybe frame this question a little bit more maybe from a personal branding standpoint, something that we talk about a lot, and I know has been talked about in this space is you're also building sometimes your personal brand, how you're personally representing yourself online and digitally. So this was created by an artist named Matt Fury, working independently in 2003. It was meant to be something to be nice and encourage people to be nice to each other. It didn't gain much traction in 2003 and kind of fell off the edge of the internet. It has since been picked up in the last few years by the alt-right movement and has become one of their key symbols that they use to indicate affiliation. It's on banners, it's on lots of websites, that kind of stuff. And the artist, Matt Fury, is currently going through a lawsuit right now with the disinformation site InfoWars because they have started using the likeness of Pepe the Frog in some of their promotional materials that they make money off of. So this is an instance where we had an image, and this was a decade later after he had created this, that this image took on a life of its own and is now directly associated with him and his brand. And doesn't necessarily have anything to do with his personal political feeling. I don't know anything what his political feelings are, but this image now has a very political message that's associated directly with him. And so I'm curious from a personal standpoint, what's different maybe about working on our personal brands in a situation like this than maybe a corporate or organizational one?
I can start with that. I would say first and foremost, I mean, what you put online is truly the essence of your brand. I mean, brand isn't really what you're saying, it's what people think about you. So in this case, I mean, he basically got associated from a meme he created, and so that is negative. And it's kind of the same rules that apply to a company. If something like this happens, you need to, one, just communicate, and he can try to disassociate from that, but I mean, it does kind of go together. So it's a tough situation, and there's several different negative outcomes. I mean, one could be that being associated with something you don't want to. One could be something you say that you don't mean to. I mean, everyone makes mistakes and says things that they don't want to, and I know that's a big issue with the younger generations is they're posting without really thinking about the consequences. What if that does go viral and you are now known as that person? And things don't leave online. I mean, online is forever. Screenshots happen. That's going to affect your future employment. So being conscious first and foremost of what you're putting out there is important. And if it does, communicate your stance as clearly as you can. And sometimes you just have to ride it out, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think oftentimes, specifically with social media, what we put out there is sometimes what people think we are, right? And so being careful with that, especially if you are in the job market soon, right? And you probably need to do a social media audit. See what you have on there, and if you need to clean something up because maybe you felt some way, or maybe Pepe the Frog turned negative, then maybe you need to take care of that. And monitoring what you do is really important.
It's difficult to top any of that. Monitor what you do. Be very careful about what you post because that's who you are. That's how people will see you, regardless of how you announce your brand.
I'm curious from a storytelling standpoint, though, assuming this has happened and you're trying to be conscientious and be proactive, how can you help rebrand yourself in this moment?
You keep telling your story the way that you want it told. You keep trying to help make sure that you engage the audience so that they understand it. It's a matter of time. It's just it's the same thing if you've bruised a friend's feelings. You got to apologize. You got to move forward and do everything you can to get over that bruise.
So, do you think companies should educate or communicate clearly to their employees on what to put on social media, just to protect their brand and to protect the whole company as a whole?
I'll get myself in a bit of trouble, but yes. Companies need to make sure employees understand what the company brand is and how they represent that company. My title is professor. When I'm out in the world, I still represent Johnson County Community College. So if I do something silly, it reflects on the college. I need to be aware that I'm associated with that brand. Now, younger folks may not feel that way, so I'll pass it on down, and they'll now take me to task. But
Yeah, so I mean, I can see it from both pictures. I think a lot of people, when they're off the clock, right? My free speech is the ability to say what I want, but at the same time, you may be a representation of the organization, and I think as an organization, it's important to clearly communicate what's expected of employees, right? And so I think if you have clear guidelines of what is acceptable and what isn't, that's where we can kind of shield ourselves as a company. If we clearly put it in writing and people sign on to work for us, knowing that you may be held accountable for what you say, then I think we're okay with that. But it has to be clearly communicated to employees.
Yep, I'd agree with all of that. So I think if there's a written policy out there, and I mean, I guess it also depends, is it legally binding? I mean, it's hard because you think First Amendment, you have the right to say things, and social media included, that's a platform. But at the same time, I personally, just my viewpoint on it is I do represent the college, and I don't want anything I do personally to hurt, my employer and so I think that just kind of depends on you as a person and also those things that are in place. And if you even backtrack a little bit to before you're hired by somewhere, you better believe they're probably looking at your social media. I mean, that's fair game. Yes, it might be a little bit of an invasion of privacy, but a lot of people do it nowadays. So that just goes back to making sure what you do have out there represents you and your brand.
Now, I would also add, as an organization, if somebody says something truly offensive and it's ground for firing, hopefully we've had an opportunity to train, and firing should be the last result or the last action, right? And so if somebody does mess up or put something out there that the company doesn't agree with or puts them in a bad light, we should definitely coach them up, because firing should be, the last resort. And so that's kind of something else I'd add.
And I agree with all that. You've got the right to free speech, guaranteed, and I will defend that. You also have the right to whatever happens because of your free speech. That's a big part that we don't always think about. So you got to, I think those type of things need to be considered. Plus, I mean, why would you want to post something that very non-professional? I've seen it happen a few times.
Well, I'm listening to what you're saying, and I agree with what you're talking about as far as taking it from a personal responsibility aspect. But my understanding with the Happy Frog situation, or Pepe the Frog thing, was that it was something that someone created as a positive image, but then somebody else who he didn't know, out of nowhere, takes it and uses it for themselves without asking for permission, without doing anything that would be considered courteous, and have spun it into this negative image. And I'm thinking to myself that if that were to happen with somebody who's like an independent artist in this case, or some small entity, I can see that there's a lot more with a larger entity taking it over and misrepresenting it, that sort of legal action. I don't know what other things you could really do to kind of set the record straight. I mean, if you're an independent artist doing something like this and somebody misconstrues the intent behind it, I don't know what else you can really do except to put more stuff out there. But even then, it may still be kind of a conflict between good, bad, which one is which. So thank you for that. It goes a little bit to Matt Fury, the creator of this image, his experience right now, that going through that, his option was to pursue legal. Because that was the only way to try to advocate for, again, his message, his story, and part of that was pursuing legal action. So, thank you for sharing, for commenting and engaging. Do we have other questions or comments? And I don't want to get away from the comment that was also made about personal accountability and that kind of thing. I want to throw out there, in part because I'm leaving the college in 2 weeks, that I would argue that your personal identities are always more important than corporate or professional identities. So I'll put that out there as someone getting ready to leave public service. That's my 2 cents, for whatever it's worth. Other thoughts or comments? Okay. We want to thank everybody for joining us. Again, this has been a great experience this semester and this year. Thank you, everybody. This is the last CoLab Talk that we will be having this year. We'll be taking a summer break, and then CoLab Talk will be returning in fall 2019. So thank you, everybody, again for joining us. And please, a round of applause for our expert panel. Thank you again for being here. Thank you, everybody.